The sun beat down mercilessly on the weathered sign that read, Whispering Pines Ranch. The paint was peeling, and the wooden post leaned slightly to one side, much like its owner, Samuel Hayes, who stood at the fence line watching the approaching cloud of dust with weary eyes. His calloused hands, marked by decades of working with horses, gripped the fence rail as the gleaming black SUV rumbled up the dirt road toward his modest ranch house. At 73, Samuel's once broad shoulders had begun to stoop, and his face was etched with deep lines that mapped a lifetime under the harsh Texas sun. But his eyes, sharp and clear as a mountain creek, missed nothing as the vehicle came to a stop, stirring dust that swirled around the polished city shoes of the man who stepped out. "Mr. Hayes?" The visitor extended his hand, flashing a smile that seemed practiced for corporate boardrooms. "Brandon Miller. We spoke on the phone about Phantom." Samuel nodded without taking the offered hand. "You're early," he said, his voice as rough as gravel. He turned and began walking toward the barn, leaving the younger man to follow. "I hope that's not a problem," Brandon replied, quickening his pace to catch up. "I'm eager to see if what they say about you is true." Samuel didn't respond. He'd heard it all before. The whispers, the doubts, the barely concealed contempt from the new generation of horse trainers with their scientific methods and fancy equipment. To them, he was just an old relic, clinging to outdated techniques and folksy wisdom that had no place in modern equestrian circles. The barn door creaked as Samuel pushed it open, revealing a dim interior that smelled of hay, horse, and honest work. At the far end, in a spacious stall, stood Phantom, 16 hands of pure midnight, a thoroughbred with a gleaming coat that seemed to absorb the shafts of light streaming through the high windows. "There he is," Samuel said, stopping a respectful distance from the stall. "Your $100,000 investment." Brandon moved closer, his expensive jacket looking out of place among the dusty beams and worn leather tack hanging on the walls. "He doesn't look dangerous," he remarked, studying the magnificent animal. "Most dangerous things don't, until they are." Samuel's eyes never left the horse, who was watching them with ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring slightly. 3 trainers have given up on him. One's still walking with a limp. "That's why I'm here." Brandon straightened his posture. "My daughter's heart is set on him for show jumping, but he's unrideable. Everyone says you're some kind of miracle worker with problem horses, though honestly, the consensus is that your methods are outdated." Samuel's weathered face remained impassive. He'd been hearing that more frequently these past few years. The young hotshots with their psychology degrees and corporate sponsors looked at him like he was a dinosaur. They had no patience, no feel for the soul of a horse. They wanted quick fixes for fast results. "Your money's no good here if you're in a hurry," Samuel said quietly. "I don't train horses on a schedule." Brandon frowned. "Mr. Hayes, I'm willing to pay double your usual fee. My daughter's competition season starts in 8 weeks. We need results." Samuel finally turned to look at the man directly. "What Phantom needs isn't a deadline. What happened to him before you bought him?" Brandon shrugged. "Previous owner didn't say much. He was trained for racing but never quite made it. Changed hands a few times. My stable manager found him at an auction." Samuel approached the stall slowly. Phantom's ears flattened against his head, and he backed away, eyes rolling to show the whites, a warning sign as clear as a rattlesnake's buzz. "He wasn't born mean," Samuel murmured, stopping his approach. "Somebody made him that way." "Can you fix him or not?" Brandon's impatience was palpable. Samuel remained silent for a long moment, studying the horse. Then he turned and walked past Brandon, heading back toward the barn entrance. "Come back in 3 days, he said over his shoulder. "I'll tell you then if I'm taking him on." 3 days? Brandon hurried after him. "I drove 4 hours to get here." "Then I suggest you find a hotel in town." Samuel paused at the door. "Phantom will tell me if he wants to be helped. I don't force horses and I don't make promises I can't keep." Brandon's face flushed with frustration. "This is ridiculous. I've heard about your so-called horse whispering, but this sounds like superstitious nonsense. Every trainer I've talked to says your methods are obsolete." Samuel's expression didn't change, but something flashed in his eyes. A momentary glimpse of the fire that still burned within the aging horseman. "Those trainers sent you to me," he pointed out quietly. "Think about why." He left Brandon standing in the barn doorway and walked back to his modest ranch house, his gait slightly uneven from an old riding injury. Inside, he moved to the kitchen window where he could watch the SUV kick up dust as it departed, faster than it had arrived. Only then did he allow his shoulders to slump slightly. On the kitchen table lay a stack of bills, the mortgage renewal for the ranch, medical expenses from his late wife's illness, and a notice of foreclosure that had arrived last week. The bank was giving him 30 days to come up with the money. After 50 years of working this land, he was about to lose everything. He poured himself a small glass of whiskey and sank into a chair at the table. Phantom would be a challenge unlike any he'd faced in years. The horse had that look in his eye, the one that spoke of betrayal and broken trust. It wouldn't be easy, and it certainly couldn't be rushed, no matter what Brandon Miller and his checkbook wanted. Samuel's gnarled fingers traced the edge of the foreclosure notice. He needed the money that Phantom's training would bring, but he wouldn't compromise his principles. Not now, not after all these years. As dusk settled over the ranch, Samuel returned to the barn. He pulled up a stool near Phantom's stall, not too close, just close enough to be present. The great black horse regarded him warily from the far corner. "Just you and me now, boy," Samuel said softly. He didn't approach, didn't make any demands. He simply sat, allowing the horse to get used to his presence. An hour passed in silence, then another. The only sounds were the gentle creaking of the barn and the occasional stamp of Phantom's hoof. Finally, as the last light faded from the high windows, the horse took a single step towards Samuel. Just one step, but it was something. "That's it," Samuel murmured. "No hurry, we've got all the time in the world." It was a lie, of course. Time was the one thing Samuel didn't have, but Phantom didn't need to know that. The next morning, Ellie Carson arrived just after sunrise. At 24, she was young enough to be Samuel's granddaughter, and in many ways, he thought of her as family. She'd been helping around the ranch since she was 16, drawn to Samuel's gentle way with horses when her own life had been in turmoil. "Heard you've got a new project," she said, handing him a cup of coffee as they stood outside the barn. "Marge at the diner said some city slicker in a fancy car was asking for directions to your place yesterday." Samuel nodded, taking a sip of the strong black coffee. "Brandon Miller paid a small fortune for a horse that's more trouble than he's worth. And he wants you to fix it," Ellie concluded. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her face fresh and freckled beneath a worn cowboy hat. Unlike the parade of trainers who had dismissed Samuel's methods, Ellie had embraced them, recognizing the deep wisdom in his patient approach. "He wants a miracle in 8 weeks," Samuel corrected, "for his daughter's show jumping." Ellie snorted. "Of course he does. What's wrong with the horse?" "Nothing that wasn't put there by humans." Samuel's voice held a note of sadness. "He's been mishandled, probably abused. Doesn't trust anyone." They walked into the barn together. Phantom was alert, watching them from his stall with suspicious eyes. "He's gorgeous," Ellie breathed, keeping her distance as Samuel had taught her. "What's your plan?" Samuel shook his head. "No plan yet. First, we listen. Then we wait." "The Samuel Hayes method," Ellie smiled, "drives the modern trainers crazy." "Modern?" Samuel scoffed quietly. "There's nothing modern about rushing and forcing. Horses haven't changed in thousands of years. Only people have, and not for the better." Ellie studied her mentor's face, noting the new lines of worry. "You okay, Samuel? You seem more ornery than usual." For a moment he considered telling her about the foreclosure notice, about the very real possibility that Whispering Pines Ranch would soon belong to the bank, but he couldn't bring himself to burden her with his troubles. Besides, there was still a chance. If he could help Phantom, if Brandon Miller paid what he promised. Just getting old, he said instead. Bones creak more than they used to. Ellie didn't look convinced, but she didn't press him. Want me to muck out the stalls while you commune with your new friend? Samuel nodded, grateful for both her help and her understanding. As she moved off to gather her tools, he approached Phantom's stall again, this time with a small apple in his palm. He didn't offer it directly, just stood there, letting the horse see it. No pressure, he said softly. It's your choice. Minutes passed. Phantom's nostrils flared, catching the scent of the apple. His ears, initially flattened in distrust, gradually rose to an attentive position. Finally, with cautious steps, he approached. He stretched his neck, keeping his body as far from Samuel as possible while his lips reached for the apple. Samuel remained perfectly still as the horse delicately took the offering. No sudden movements, no attempt to touch or control. Just a simple exchange. Trust given, trust received. It was the smallest of beginnings, but as Samuel knew better than anyone, that was how all great journeys started. Whether there was enough time for this particular journey remained to be seen. As he watched Phantom retreat back to his corner, Samuel's mind drifted to all the horses he'd helped over the decades. The abused, the traumatized, the misunderstood. Each one had taught him something. Each one had left its mark on his soul. He just hoped he'd get the chance to help this one too, before everything he'd built slipped away like sand through his weathered fingers. 3 days passed in a rhythm as ancient as horsemanship itself. Each morning, Samuel would enter the barn before dawn, settling on his stool near Phantom's stall, with nothing but patience and silence to offer. Each day, the magnificent black horse would approach a little closer, stay a little longer, his suspicion gradually giving way to cautious curiosity. By the third morning, Phantom was taking apples directly from Samuel's hand, his velvety muzzle brushing against calloused skin with delicate precision. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the foundation upon which trust could be built. He's making progress, Ellie observed, leaning against a post as she watched the gentle exchange. Faster than I expected, actually. Samuel nodded, his eyes never leaving the horse. He's intelligent, traumatized, but intelligent. That makes all the difference. The crunch of tires on gravel announced Brandon Miller's return. Samuel sighed, reluctantly moving away from Phantom, who retreated to his corner as the barn door swung open to reveal the impatient client. "Well?" Brandon demanded without preamble. "Can you fix him or not?" Samuel studied the younger man, noting the expensive watch, the manicured nails, the air of someone accustomed to buying solutions rather than earning them. "I'll take him on," he said finally, "but I stand by what I said. This won't be quick and it won't be easy." Relief washed over Brandon's face. "Thank you. My daughter will be—" "There are conditions," Samuel interrupted. "First, I work alone my way. No interference, no spectators except my assistant Ellie. Second, I can't guarantee results by your timeline. Horses don't heal by schedule." Brandon's relief gave way to frustration. "Mr. Hayes, the Wellington International is in 8 weeks. My daughter should find another horse for Wellington," Samuel finished firmly. "Phantom isn't ready, and pushing him will only set him back. If that's not acceptable, there are plenty of trainers who will promise you what you want to hear." Brandon's jaw tightened. "And what about what I'm paying you? Doesn't that buy some accommodation?" Samuel's gaze remained steady. "It buys my expertise and my honesty. Nothing more." A tense silence stretched between them. Finally, Brandon exhaled sharply. "Fine. How long then? Your best estimate?" 3 months minimum," Samuel replied. "Maybe longer." 3 months? Brandon ran a hand through his carefully styled hair. "That's impossible. Madison will be devastated." "Madison?" Samuel raised an eyebrow. "My daughter." Brandon pulled out his phone, scrolling briefly before holding up a photo of a teenage girl with a wide smile and bright eyes, sitting atop a chestnut mare. "She's 17, riding since she was 5. This is her last junior year of competition before college." Something in the photo caught Samuel's attention. not the girl, but the look in her eyes when she gazed at her horse. There was genuine affection there, a connection that couldn't be faked for a camera. "Bring her here," Samuel said suddenly. Brandon blinked in surprise. "What?" "Your daughter. Bring her here tomorrow. I want to meet her." "But you just said no spectators." "She's not a spectator. She's Phantom's owner." Samuel turned back toward the stall where the black horse watched them warily. "I need to see if there's any chance of a real partnership there." Brandon hesitated, then nodded. "All right. We'll come tomorrow afternoon." "And the fee we discussed?" Samuel named his price, higher than his usual rate, but still reasonable compared to the celebrity trainers who had failed with Phantom. Brandon didn't flinch, which told Samuel all he needed to know about the man's financial situation. "Half now, half when we're done," Brandon said, reaching for his checkbook. Samuel nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and unease as he watched the man write the check. The amount would keep the bank at bay for a while, but taking money for a job he wasn't certain he could complete in the time frame Brandon wanted left a sour taste in his mouth. After Brandon departed, Samuel found Ellie in the tack room, cleaning bridles with methodical care. "He's bringing his daughter tomorrow," Samuel told her, sinking onto a wooden bench with a weary sigh. "Maybe she'll understand what her father doesn't." "About horses, or about you?" Ellie asked with a knowing smile. "Both, hopefully." Samuel rubbed his knee where an old injury flared in the changing weather. "I've got a feeling about this one, Ellie. Phantom's carrying deep wounds, and they're not the kind that heal with treats and time alone." "If anyone can reach him, it's you," Ellie said, her faith in her mentor unwavering. Samuel wished he shared her confidence. As the years had passed, he'd begun to doubt himself more, wondering if the changing world was leaving him behind. The methods that had once made him renowned now made him an anachronism in the eyes of younger trainers. The next day brought Madison Miller to Whispering Pines Ranch. Unlike her father, who arrived in designer jeans that had never seen a day of real work, Madison wore well-worn riding boots and practical clothes. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and there was an earnestness in her expression that Samuel found promising. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Hayes," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "I've read all about your work with difficult horses." Samuel raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "Have you now?" She nodded enthusiastically. "Your case study with that Appaloosa, Storm, I think his name was, the one who kept throwing his riders? I wrote a paper on your methods for my equine behavior class." Brandon cleared his throat. "Madison is very dedicated to her riding. She's been accepted to Cornell's veterinary program after she graduates." Samuel nodded, increasingly intrigued by the girl who seemed so different from her father. "Let's introduce you to Phantom, then." Inside the barn, Samuel guided Madison toward the stall, noting how she instinctively kept a respectful distance, reading the horse's body language without needing to be told. "He's magnificent," she breathed, taking in the powerful lines of the thoroughbred. "And dangerous," her father added quickly. "3 trainers have failed him," Samuel finished, "not the other way around." Madison shot Samuel a look of surprised appreciation. Phantom, who had retreated to the back of his stall when they entered, was watching Madison intently, ears forward with interest rather than flattened in fear. "He's curious about you," Samuel observed. "That's good." "Can I approach him?" Madison asked. "Not yet. First, just talk to him. Let him get used to your voice." Madison nodded and began speaking softly to Phantom, telling him about her other horse, about her dreams of veterinary school, about the ribbons she hoped they might win together someday. As she spoke, Phantom gradually moved closer to the front of the stall. "He likes you," Samuel said, watching the horse's relaxed posture. "You have a way about you." Brandon checked his watch impatiently. "So you think you can have him ready by Wellington or not?" The spell was broken. Phantom's ears flattened, and he backed away, sensing the tension that suddenly filled the barn. "Dad," Madison said quietly, disappointment evident in her voice. "It doesn't matter about Wellington. I want Phantom to be okay more than I want another ribbon." Samuel studied the girl with newfound respect. "Wisdom beyond your years," he murmured. Brandon sighed, clearly torn between his daughter's wishes and his own expectations. We've invested a lot in this, Madison. I know, Dad, but Mr. Hayes is right. Horses don't heal on our schedule. She turned to Samuel. What do you need from me? Time, Samuel replied honestly. And patience. Can you visit regularly? Maybe a few hours each weekend? It would help him form a bond with you while I work with him during the week. Madison nodded eagerly. Absolutely. I can drive out on Saturdays and Sundays. That's a 2-hour drive each way, Brandon protested. I don't mind, Madison insisted. Please, Dad, this is important. After a moment of internal struggle, Brandon relented. Fine, but I want weekly progress reports, Mr. Hayes. And if there's no significant improvement in a month, we may need to reconsider. Samuel fought the urge to argue. 1 month was still an impossible timeline for the kind of deep rehabilitation Phantom needed, but it was better than nothing, and having Madison involved might make all the difference. After the Millers departed, Ellie found Samuel sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the pastures that had been his life's work. The girl's different from her father, she remarked, settling beside him. Night and day, Samuel agreed. She might be Phantom's best chance. And the money? Will it help with? She nodded toward the house, where they both knew the foreclosure notice sat on the kitchen table. Samuel sighed. It buys us time. Not enough, but some. Ellie was silent for a moment. Have you considered selling some of the back acreage? You don't use that part much anymore. Thought about it, Samuel admitted. But once I start selling off pieces, where does it end? This land has been in my family for 3 generations. And it's worth losing all of it to keep all of it? Ellie asked gently. Samuel had no answer for that. The sun was setting over the western fields, casting long shadows across the land that held his history, his memories, his very identity. The thought of parceling it out to developers or wealthy weekenders seeking country estates made his chest tighten. One problem at a time, he said finally. Right now, my job is to help that horse. The rest will have to wait. But as darkness fell over Whispering Pines Ranch, Samuel knew that time, that most precious and unforgiving of resources, was running out on multiple fronts. For Phantom, for the ranch, and perhaps for his own way of life in a world that increasingly valued speed over substance, results over process, profit over patience. That night, he returned to the barn with his guitar, an old Martin that had been his father's before him. Settling on his stool near Phantom's stall, he began to play softly, the gentle melody filling the quiet barn with warmth. In the corner of his stall, Phantom's ears swiveled toward the music. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the great black horse moved closer, drawn by the simple comfort of song in the darkness. By the time Samuel finished playing, Phantom stood at the stall door, his head lowered, breathing steady and calm. It wasn't a breakthrough, not yet, but it was a beginning, a single note in what might, with time and trust, become a new harmony for both horse and man. Saturday dawned clear and cool, a perfect Texas spring morning. Samuel was already in the barn when Madison's modest sedan pulled up beside Ellie's pickup truck. Unlike her father's ostentatious SUV, Madison's car was practical and slightly dusty, a vehicle for function rather than impression. "Morning, Mr. Hayes," she called, climbing out with a thermos in one hand and a worn backpack slung over her shoulder. "I brought coffee if you'd like some." Samuel nodded appreciatively. "Never turn down good coffee. You're early." "Wanted to beat the traffic," she explained, pouring the steaming liquid into the cup portion of her thermos. "And I was too excited to sleep much anyway." As Samuel accepted the coffee, he noticed the dark circles under Madison's eyes. "Your father know you're here this early?" A shadow passed across her face. "He had a business breakfast in Dallas. I left him a note." Samuel didn't pry further, but he sensed tension beneath her words. Instead, he guided her toward Phantom's stall where the horse watched them approach, alert but not alarmed. "He remembers you," Samuel observed. "That's good." Madison's expression brightened. "What should we do today?" "Nothing. Samuel replied, settling onto his stool. "We'll just sit with him a while." Madison blinked in surprise but didn't protest. She found a hay bale nearby and perched on it, sipping her coffee in silence as Samuel had instructed. Minutes stretched into a half-hour with no words spoken, just the ambient sounds of the barn, horses shifting in stalls, pigeons cooing in the rafters, the occasional creak of old timber settling. "Is this really helping?" Madison finally whispered, careful not to disturb the quiet atmosphere. Samuel nodded. "Most folks rush interactions with horses, especially troubled ones. They're always trying to do something, train them, ride them, fix them. But sometimes the most powerful thing is doing nothing, just being present." Madison considered this, watching as Phantom gradually relaxed in their presence, eventually lowering his head to nibble at some hay. "My other trainers always had schedules," she said. "Exercise programs, training milestones, feeding regimens timed to the minute." "And how did that work out for Phantom?" Samuel asked gently. Madison sighed. "The first trainer quit after Phantom refused every jump. The second lasted longer but couldn't get him to accept a bit without fighting. The third—" She trailed off. "The third got hurt," Samuel finished, "because they pushed too hard, too fast." She nodded, looking down. "Dad was furious about the medical bills, said Phantom was a liability." "Your father sees horses as investments," Samuel observed, no judgment in his voice. "You see them differently." "They're partners," Madison said with quiet conviction. "At least they should be." Samuel smiled, the expression softening the weathered lines of his face. "That's a good place to start." Over the next few hours, they gradually moved closer to Phantom's stall, Samuel demonstrating how to read the subtle signals in the horse's posture and expression. By midday, Madison was able to offer an apple over the stall door, which Phantom cautiously accepted. "That's enough for today," Samuel announced, noting the tension beginning to return to Phantom's muscles. Best to end on a positive note. Though clearly reluctant to leave, Madison didn't argue. "Same time tomorrow?" "A bit later if you don't mind. I've got church in the morning." Madison seemed surprised by this revelation about the rugged horseman. "Of course. Is 1 o'clock okay?" Samuel nodded, walking her to her car. As she drove away, Ellie emerged from the feed room where she'd been giving them space to work. "She's got the touch," Ellie remarked. "Doesn't push, doesn't grab for what she wants." "Unlike her father," Samuel agreed. "Speaking of which, I half expected him to show up with her." "Give it time," Ellie said wryly. "He's not the type to stay hands-off for long." Samuel's expression darkened. "That's what I'm afraid of." After Ellie left for the day, Samuel returned to the house to tackle the growing stack of bills on his kitchen table. The first envelope contained another notice from the bank. Not a foreclosure this time, but a reminder that his deadline was approaching. 23 days remained before Whispering Pines would go to auction. Samuel sank into a chair, the weight of decades pressing down on his shoulders. The deposit from Brandon Miller had bought him some breathing room, but not enough. Even if he sold off the back 20 acres, as Ellie had suggested, it wouldn't cover what he owed. He'd need to sell at least half the ranch, which would mean the end of his breeding program, the end of the small herd of rescue horses he maintained, the end of everything he'd built his life around. A knock at the door interrupted his grim calculations. Samuel was surprised to find Martin Webb, his nearest neighbor, standing on the porch with a folder tucked under one arm. "Evening, Samuel," Martin said, removing his hat. "Got a minute to talk?" Samuel invited him in, offering coffee, which Martin declined with a wave of his hand. "I'll get right to it," Martin said, settling at the kitchen table. "Word is you're in a tight spot with the bank." Samuel's eyes narrowed. Small towns had no secrets, but he hadn't expected his financial troubles to become common knowledge so quickly. "News travels fast," he remarked dryly. Martin nodded, looking uncomfortable. "My son-in-law works at First National. He didn't give me details, but—" He trailed off, then pushed the folder across the table. "I want to make you an offer on your back 40, the part that borders my east pasture." Samuel stiffened. Not looking to sell, Martin. Just hear me out, his neighbor insisted. I'm offering fair market value. You know I won't develop it or put up one of those god-awful McMansions. It stays as grazing land, just under my name instead of yours. Samuel reluctantly opened the folder. The offer was indeed fair, generous even. It would cover about 2/3 of what he owed the bank. I appreciate the thought, Samuel said finally. But it's not enough to solve my problem, and I'd rather not sell the land piecemeal if I can help it. Martin leaned forward, his expression earnest. Samuel, we've been neighbors for 30 years. I know what this place means to you. I'm trying to help you keep most of it at least. I know that, and I'm grateful, but I've got a line on some work that might pull me out of this hole. It wasn't exactly a lie. If Phantom's rehabilitation went well and Brandon paid the second half of his fee, it would help. Not enough, but it would help. Martin didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. Offer stands if you change your mind, but don't wait too long. These things have a way of getting away from you fast. After Martin left, Samuel sat alone in the gathering darkness, the folder still open on the table. The logical part of his brain told him to accept the offer, to salvage what he could of his life's work. But something deeper, pride perhaps, or the stubborn hope that had carried him through other difficult times, held him back. Sunday afternoon brought Madison back to the ranch, this time with a small book on equine psychology tucked under her arm. She found Samuel in the round pen, where Phantom was loose, trotting around the perimeter with his tail raised and nostrils flared. Is something wrong? She asked, noting the horse's agitated state. Samuel shook his head. Just letting him move. He's been cooped up too long. He pointed to a spot on the fence. Stand there. Don't make eye contact with him yet. Madison obeyed, watching as Samuel stood quietly in the center of the round pen, his body language calm and neutral as Phantom circled nervously around him. What are you doing? She whispered after several minutes of this. Waiting, Samuel replied simply. Another 10 minutes passed with Phantom continuing his anxious circuit. Then, almost imperceptibly, the horse's pace began to slow. His head, which had been held high in alertness, gradually lowered. His tail relaxed from its arched position. Samuel made no move, said nothing, simply maintained his calm presence in the center of the pen. Finally, Phantom stopped, turned his head toward Samuel, and lowered it further, a subtle gesture that most would have missed. There it is, Samuel murmured. He turned slightly, angling his body away from the horse, and took a single step backward. To Madison's astonishment, Phantom walked toward Samuel, stopping a few feet away. He's choosing to approach you, she breathed, understanding dawning on her face. Samuel nodded, still not looking directly at the horse. It's not about dominating them. It's about giving them a choice. When they choose to connect, that's when real training begins. Madison's eyes shone with excitement. That's incredible. Can I try? Not today, Samuel said gently. This is just the first step. We've got a long way to go. As if to emphasize Samuel's point, a car door slammed in the distance, and Phantom immediately bolted to the far side of the round pen, reverting to his defensive posture. Brandon Miller strode toward them, his polished boots ill-suited for the dusty ranch yard. Madison, I've been calling you for an hour. Sorry, Dad. My phone's in the car. We were having a breakthrough with Phantom. Brandon glanced skeptically at the now nervous horse. Doesn't look like much of a breakthrough to me. He turned to Samuel. It's been a week, Mr. Hayes. What progress have you made? Before Samuel could answer, Madison stepped in. Dad, you can't rush this. Mr. Hayes is using methods that I'm paying a premium for, Brandon interrupted. And so far, all I see is a horse that's still unrideable and still dangerous. Samuel remained calm, his voice level. Mr. Miller, I told you from the start that this would take time. Phantom is beginning to trust us, but he's still carrying deep trauma. Push too hard now, and we'll lose all the ground we've gained. Brandon's jaw tightened. My daughter's dreams are riding on this horse, Mr. Hayes. I need to see tangible progress, not mystical horse-whispering techniques that may or may not work. Dad, please, Madison pleaded. Mr. Hayes knows what he's doing. I can see the difference in Phantom already. Brandon looked from his daughter to Samuel, conflict evident in his expression. Finally, he sighed. 1 more week. Then I want to see him accepting basic handling at minimum. Halter, lead rope, grooming. Something concrete. After he walked back to his car to wait for Madison, she turned to Samuel with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry. He means well, he just wants the best for you, Samuel finished. I understand that. But Phantom's timeline isn't your father's timeline. You know that, right? Madison nodded, glancing at the horse who was still keeping his distance. I know, and I'll try to make him understand too. See you next Saturday? As she jogged back to join her father, Ellie approached from the barn where she'd been watching the interaction. 1 week, she said, concern evident in her voice. That's not enough time. Samuel's weathered face revealed nothing, but his eyes held a quiet determination. Then we'll make the most of every minute. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Samuel sat on his porch with his guitar, playing the old songs that had comforted him through a lifetime of challenges. The music drifted across the ranch, to the barn where Phantom was slowly learning to trust again, to the pastures that generations of Hayes men had worked, to the uncertain future that loomed like a storm on the horizon. 1 week to show progress, 21 days to save the ranch, and somewhere in between, the delicate task of healing a broken horse without breaking himself in the process. Monday morning arrived with a thunderstorm that rattled the windows of the ranch house and turned the training grounds to mud. Samuel stood at the kitchen window, watching lightning fork across the sky as he sipped his coffee. The weather matched his mood, dark, turbulent, and uncertain. 1 week. Brandon Miller's deadline echoed in his mind like the rolling thunder outside. Experienced horsemen knew that training couldn't be rushed, that healing took the time it took, especially with a horse as damaged as Phantom. But men like Brandon, men who believed money could solve any problem, didn't understand such intangibles. The phone rang, pulling Samuel from his thoughts. It was Jim Rollins from the bank. Just checking in, Samuel, Jim said, his voice carefully neutral. Wanted to see if you'd made any progress on the loan situation. Samuel gripped the phone tighter. Working on it, Jim. Got a partial payment coming your way this week. Partial won't cut it, I'm afraid. The higher-ups are watching this one closely. 20 years I've banked with you folks, Samuel reminded him. Never missed a payment until Margaret got sick. Jim sighed. I know that, Samuel. That's why I've been fighting for you. But facts are facts. You're 3 payments behind. And with the medical bills you consolidated into the mortgage, well, the numbers just don't work. After hanging up, Samuel pulled on his rain gear and headed to the barn. The steady drumming of rain on the metal roof created a cocoon of sound inside, isolating the space from the outside world. Phantom nickered softly when Samuel entered, a small sign of progress that lightened his heart despite everything. Morning to you too, Samuel said, approaching the stall with an apple in his palm. Looks like we're stuck inside today. Phantom took the apple gently, no longer retreating to the back of his stall when Samuel came near. They'd made progress, certainly, but would it be enough to satisfy Brandon Miller? The sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Samuel turned to see Ellie hurrying in from the rain, shaking water from her jacket. Didn't expect to see you in this weather, he remarked. Thought you might need help, given the timeline. She said the last word with a grimace. Any idea how you're going to show tangible progress by Saturday? Samuel shrugged. Going to focus on what Phantom needs, not what Miller wants. Beyond that, we'll see where we get. Ellie hung her jacket on a peg. What's the plan for today then? Grooming, Samuel said simply. If he'll accept it. Over the next few hours, they worked patiently with Phantom, gradually introducing him to the soft brush, allowing him to sniff and examine it before Samuel made any attempt to use it. When he finally did bring the brush to Phantom's neck, the horse tensed but didn't pull away. Another small victory. By afternoon, the storm had passed, leaving behind puddles and a clean, washed scent in the air. Samuel led Ellie to the small office at the back of the barn, where decades of horse breeding records were kept in meticulously maintained ledgers. "I've been thinking," he said, pulling a worn leather book from the shelf. "Phantom's issues run deeper than just bad handling. Look here." He opened the book to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "I did some digging into his bloodlines after Miller left. His grandsire on the dam's side was a stallion called Midnight Fury." Ellie's eyes widened in recognition. "The one who killed his handler at Churchill Downs?" Samuel nodded grimly. "The very same. They nearly put him down, but he had too much value as a stud. Passed those same high-strung genes to his offspring." He closed the book with a sigh. "Phantom's not just fighting bad training. He's fighting his own breeding." "Does Madison know?" "Not yet. Not sure her father would care either way. All he sees is a price tag and a deadline." Ellie leaned against the desk, her expression troubled. "What about your deadline, Samuel? The bank?" Samuel's face closed like a shutter. "I'm handling it." "Are you?" "Because I talked to Martin yesterday and he mentioned his offer. Said you turned it down." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Didn't realize my financial affairs were up for public discussion." "It's not public discussion when it's me," Ellie countered, her voice gentle but firm. "I care about what happens to you, to this place." She gestured around them. "Whispering Pines isn't just land and buildings. It's everything you've built, everything you've taught people like me. If selling some acreage saves the rest, it's not that simple," Samuel interrupted. "Once I start selling, the vultures will circle. You know as well as I do what happens to small ranches these days. Developers chopping them into 5-acre ranchettes for city folks who want to play cowboy on weekends." Ellie fell silent, unable to argue with the truth of his words. They'd both seen it happen to other properties in the area, the slow dismantling of working ranches into decorative hobby farms and sprawling vacation homes. "Just promise me you're considering all options," she said finally. Samuel nodded, not meeting her eyes. "I am." The rest of the week unfolded in a rhythm of small steps forward and occasional steps back. Tuesday saw Phantom accepting the halter without resistance. Wednesday, he allowed Samuel to lead him around the barn, though he balked at the doorway, refusing to step outside. Thursday brought rain again, confining their work to the barn where Samuel introduced a saddle pad, letting Phantom smell and examine it without actually placing it on his back. Friday dawned clear and cool, the last full day before Brandon Miller's arbitrary deadline. Samuel was in the round pen with Phantom when Madison's car pulled up, a day earlier than expected. "Sorry to show up unannounced," she called, climbing out with an anxious expression. "I had a half day at school and thought I might help." She approached the round pen slowly, careful not to spook Phantom, who was loose inside with Samuel. "Everything all right?" Samuel asked, noting the tension in her posture. Madison sighed, leaning against the fence rails. "Dad's been talking to other trainers again. Behind your back." Samuel wasn't surprised, but the confirmation still stung. "Let me guess. They're promising quick results?" She nodded miserably. "There's a guy in Oklahoma who claims he can have any horse fixed in 2 weeks, guaranteed. Dad's been watching his videos online." "There are no guarantees with horses," Samuel said, his voice even. "Anyone who tells you different is either lying or doesn't know enough to understand they're wrong." "I know that," Madison said, frustration evident in her voice. "But Dad only sees that tomorrow is your deadline, and he's expecting Phantom to be magically transformed." Samuel gestured for her to enter the round pen, showing her how to move with calm confidence as she approached. Phantom watched her with alert interest, his ears pricked forward. "Talk to him," Samuel instructed. "Let him remember your voice." Madison began speaking softly, telling Phantom about her day, about the biology test she'd aced, about her hopes for their partnership. As she spoke, the horse lowered his head and took a step toward her. "He's listening," Samuel observed. "That's good. Now stand still and let him come to you if he chooses." Minutes passed in silence. Then, with cautious curiosity, Phantom approached Madison, stretching his neck to sniff her outstretched hand. "Oh," she gasped, remaining still as Samuel had taught her. "He's so gentle." "He can be," Samuel agreed, "when he feels safe." He handed her a soft brush. "See if he'll let you groom his neck. Just a little." Madison moved with natural grace, her movements slow and telegraphed as she brought the brush to Phantom's glossy coat. The horse tensed momentarily, then relaxed as she began gentle, rhythmic strokes. "This is amazing," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. A month ago, nobody could get near him without him rearing or charging. Samuel watched them together, seeing the potential for a real partnership. "You have good instincts with him. Natural patience." "Thanks to your teaching," she replied, continuing the gentle grooming. "I just wish Dad could see that what you're doing is working." "Why don't you bring him out early tomorrow?" Samuel suggested. "Let him see this, see what's possible when we follow Phantom's timeline, not ours." Madison's face brightened. "That's a great idea. He has a breakfast meeting, but I think I can convince him to come after." She stayed for 2 more hours, working with Phantom under Samuel's guidance. By the time she left, the horse was accepting her touch along his neck and shoulders, not yet his back or hindquarters, which still triggered his defensive instincts, but progress nonetheless. After Madison departed, Ellie helped Samuel put Phantom back in his stall for the evening. "She's good with him," Ellie remarked. "Better than her father deserves." Samuel nodded, his mind already on tomorrow's confrontation. "Let's hope Miller can see what's right in front of him." That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He paced his living room, mentally rehearsing what he would say to Brandon Miller, how he would demonstrate the progress they'd made with Phantom without pushing the horse beyond his current comfort zone. Around midnight, he gave up on sleep entirely and returned to the barn. Phantom was awake, watching with bright eyes as Samuel settled on his stool outside the stall. The old horseman hadn't brought treats or tools, just himself and the quiet solidarity of sleepless nights. "Tomorrow's a big day for both of us, boy," Samuel said softly. "Lot of people making decisions about our futures who don't fully understand what they're deciding." Phantom nickered softly, moving closer to the stall door than he ever had before. "You're doing your part," Samuel continued, "making progress every day. Wish I could say the same about my situation." He pulled the foreclosure notice from his pocket, staring at the impersonal type that summarized his failure to maintain the legacy his father and grandfather had entrusted to him. 20 days remained before the auction. Even if Brandon paid the remainder of his fee tomorrow, which seemed increasingly unlikely, it wouldn't be enough to save Whispering Pines. The realization he'd been fighting settled over him like a heavy blanket. He would have to sell some of the land. Martin's offer for the back 40 would buy him time at least. It wasn't what he wanted, but perhaps it was what he needed. "Sometimes we have to accept the path in front of us," he told Phantom, "even when it's not the one we would have chosen." The horse stretched his neck over the stall door, and for the first time allowed Samuel to touch his face, gently stroking the white blaze that ran from his forelock to his muzzle. It was a moment of connection, of mutual understanding between two beings facing uncertain futures. And in that quiet midnight hour, it felt like enough. Not a solution to the problems that awaited them in the morning, but a reminder of why those problems were worth facing. "We'll show them tomorrow," Samuel promised, his weathered hand gentle against Phantom's velvet muzzle. "We'll show them what's possible when you lead with patience instead of force." As if understanding, Phantom lowered his head and exhaled softly, his breath warm against Samuel's palm, a gesture of trust that had been weeks in the making. Outside, the moon cast long shadows across the ranch, illuminating what was and what might still be, if only time and circumstance would allow. Saturday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes after a restless night. Samuel was in the barn before dawn, not from discipline but from the simple inability to stay in bed with so much at stake. He mucked Phantom's stall, refreshed his water, and prepared a small breakfast of oats and Timothy hay. Ordinary tasks that provided the illusion of normalcy on a day that was anything but normal. Phantom watched him work, more relaxed in his presence than he had been just a week ago. When Samuel approached the stall door, the horse no longer retreated to the far corner, but stood his ground, ears forward with interest rather than flattened in fear. "Well, boy," Samuel said softly, "today's the day we show them what you can do. Just be yourself. That'll be enough." Ellie arrived an hour later, bringing fresh donuts and coffee from the diner in town. "Thought you could use the reinforcements," she said, setting the box on a hay bale. "Miller called me this morning." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "What did he want?" "To ask if I thought you were making any real progress with Phantom." She poured coffee into a paper cup and handed it to him. "I told him he should come see for himself." "And Willie?" Ellie nodded. "Said he'd be here at 10, with Madison." Samuel glanced at his watch. Just over an hour to prepare. "What's your read on him? Think he's already made up his mind?" "Hard to say." Ellie took a bite of a glazed donut, chewing thoughtfully. He sounded skeptical, but not dismissive. "I think a lot depends on what happens today." They spent the next hour preparing. Samuel groomed Phantom until his black coat gleamed in the morning light. He set up the round pen, arranging a few simple obstacles: a pole on the ground, a small barrel, a colorful pool noodle attached to a fence post. Nothing that would overwhelm Phantom, but enough to demonstrate their progress if the horse was willing. At precisely 10 o'clock, the Millers' vehicles pulled into the ranch yard, Brandon's gleaming SUV followed by Madison's modest sedan. Samuel took a deep breath, centering himself before walking out to meet them. "Mr. Miller," he greeted with a nod. "Madison, thanks for coming." Brandon's expression was guarded, his body language tense as he shook Samuel's hand. "Mr. Hayes, I'm here to see what my money has bought so far." Madison shot her father a reproachful look before turning to Samuel with an encouraging smile. "I told Dad about yesterday, how Phantom let me groom him." "That's what we'll build on today," Samuel replied, guiding them toward the barn. "But first, I want to explain something about Phantom's background that may help you understand the process better." Inside, he showed them the breeding ledger he'd consulted earlier in the week, explaining about Midnight Fury and the genetic component to Phantom's temperament. "So he was born difficult," Brandon concluded, frowning. "Born with certain predispositions," Samuel corrected. "But his behavior isn't fixed or predetermined. It's been shaped by his experiences, and unfortunately, those experiences taught him to fear and distrust humans." "Can that be changed?" Madison asked, concern evident in her voice. "It already is changing," Samuel assured her. "But it takes time to unlearn deep fear. That's what I've been trying to help him do. Not train him to perform tricks or jump fences, but to trust again." Brandon checked his watch impatiently. "This is all very philosophical, Mr. Hayes, but I was promised a demonstration today. Something tangible." Samuel nodded, leading them to Phantom's stall. The horse was alert, his ears swiveling to track the newcomers. When he spotted Madison, he nickered softly, a sound that brought a beaming smile to the girl's face. "He remembers me," she exclaimed. "Horses never forget," Samuel said, "the good or the bad." He handed Madison a halter. "Let's see if he'll let you put this on him today." Brandon crossed his arms, watching skeptically as his daughter entered the stall under Samuel's careful guidance. Phantom remained calm, lowering his head slightly as Madison approached with quiet confidence. When she lifted the halter toward him, he tensed momentarily but didn't pull away. With gentle movements, she slipped it over his ears and fastened the buckle. "Good boy," she whispered, stroking his neck. "Such a good boy." "That's the first time he's accepted the halter from someone other than me," Samuel explained to Brandon. "It's significant progress." Brandon looked unimpressed. "My daughter put a halter on a horse. That's it? After a week of your expensive intervention?" "Dad," Madison protested, "you don't understand. A week ago, nobody could get near him without him panicking. Let's take him to the round pen," Samuel suggested, keeping his voice steady despite the growing tension. "There's more to show you." Outside, Madison led Phantom across the yard, the horse following willingly, if somewhat cautiously. In the round pen, Samuel instructed her to remove the lead rope but leave the halter on, allowing Phantom freedom to move while maintaining some connection. "Now I want you to try something," Samuel told Madison. "Remember how we practiced moving with intention yesterday? I want you to walk toward that barrel, thinking clearly about where you're going, and see if Phantom will follow you without being led." Madison nodded, focusing her attention on the barrel as Samuel had taught her. She walked with deliberate steps, her body language conveying clear intent. After a moment's hesitation, Phantom followed, staying a few feet behind her but clearly tracking her movement. "Amazing," Madison breathed when she reached the barrel and Phantom stopped beside her. "This is what I mean by partnership," Samuel explained to Brandon. "It's not about controlling the horse. It's about communicating with him. Phantom is choosing to follow Madison because he's beginning to trust her." Brandon shifted his weight, looking slightly less skeptical but not entirely convinced. "Can she ride him yet?" "No," Samuel said firmly. "And pushing for that too soon would destroy the progress we've made. Phantom associates riders with pain and fear. We need to rebuild his confidence before attempting that." "How long?" Brandon demanded. "Another month at least, before we even consider introducing a saddle. Maybe longer before actual riding." Brandon's jaw tightened. "That's not acceptable, Mr. Hayes. The whole point of this exercise was to get him ready for Madison's competitions." "The point," Samuel countered calmly, "was to rehabilitate a traumatized horse. You agreed to my timeline when you hired me." "I agreed to give you a chance to show real progress," Brandon retorted. "A horse that follows someone around a pen isn't progress. It's a party trick." Madison's face fell as she listened to her father's dismissal of what, to her, felt like a miraculous breakthrough. "Dad, please." "No, Madison. We've invested too much in your riding career to waste another month on a horse that might never be competition ready." Brandon turned back to Samuel. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes, but I think we need a different approach. I've spoken to a trainer in Oklahoma who specializes in rapid rehabilitation." Samuel's expression hardened. "Tyler Jamison? The one with the viral videos?" Brandon looked surprised. "You know him?" "I know of him. I also know 3 horses he rehabilitated that ended up being put down after they snapped under his methods." Samuel's voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the surface. "Jamison uses fear and pain to force compliance. It looks impressive on camera, but it destroys the horse's spirit. Is that what you want for Phantom?" Brandon flushed, caught between defensiveness and uncertainty. "Of course not. But I need results, not philosophy." "What you're seeing today is a result," Samuel insisted, gesturing to where Madison stood with Phantom, the horse calm and attentive beside her. "It's just not the flashy, immediate kind you were hoping for." The tension between the two men was palpable. Madison looked from her father to Samuel, distress evident in her expression. "Please don't fight about this," she said quietly. "It's not helping Phantom." Her words seemed to penetrate Brandon's irritation. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "One more week," he said finally. "One more week to show me that your approach can get us where we need to be." "And if it doesn't?" Samuel asked, already knowing the answer. "Then I move Phantom to Jamison's facility. I've already discussed it with him." After the Millers departed, Madison with a tearful goodbye to Phantom, Brandon with a terse nod to Samuel, Ellie found the old horseman sitting on the fence of the empty round pen, staring into the distance. "One more week," she said, climbing up to sit beside him. "Better than nothing, I guess." Samuel nodded absently, his mind elsewhere. He'll take Phantom to Jamison, and that horse will either break completely or turn truly dangerous. Either way, he'll end up destroyed. "You don't know that for certain," Ellie offered, though her tone suggested she feared the same outcome. "I've seen it before. Men like Jamison don't fix horses. They break them into submission, and horses like Phantom, with that bloodline and that history." He trailed off, shaking his head. It's a recipe for disaster. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling between them. What about the ranch? Ellie finally asked. Any decision on Martin's offer? Samuel pulled an envelope from his pocket. Called him this morning. The paperwork's being drawn up. His voice was flat, defeated in a way Ellie had never heard before. 40 acres. My grandfather bought that land with cash saved during the Depression. Never thought I'd be the one to let it go. Ellie placed a hand on his shoulder, offering silent support. It's not all the ranch, and it's not forever. Maybe someday you can buy it back. Maybe, Samuel agreed, though he didn't sound convinced. Meanwhile, I've got 1 more week to help Phantom, and 19 days to come up with the rest of what I owe the bank. The sound of an approaching vehicle drew their attention. A sleek black pickup truck with out-of-state plates pulled into the yard, and a woman in her 40s stepped out, dressed in practical riding clothes but with an air of affluence about her. Can I help you? Samuel called, climbing down from the fence. The woman approached with confident strides. I hope so. My name is Claire Roberts. I'm looking for Samuel Hayes. You found him. She smiled, extending her hand. Mr. Hayes, I've heard a lot about your work with troubled horses. I have a mare with severe trailer loading issues that nobody's been able to solve. She's for my daughter's eventing career, and we're at our wits' end. Would you be willing to take her on? Samuel hesitated, caught off guard by the unexpected opportunity. I'm afraid my schedule is pretty full at the moment, Ms. Roberts. I understand, but we're desperate. Money is no object. She named a figure that made even Ellie's eyebrows rise. And of course, we'd pay half up front. The amount would cover what remained of Samuel's debt to the bank, if combined with Martin's payment for the 40 acres. He could save the ranch without selling any more land. It seemed like the answer to his prayers, arriving just when he needed it most. But accepting meant dividing his attention during Phantom's critical final week. And something about the timing felt too convenient, too perfect. How did you hear about me exactly? Samuel asked, studying Claire Roberts more carefully. A mutual acquaintance, she replied smoothly. Brandon Miller. We serve on the same charity board in Dallas. He mentioned you were working wonders with his daughter's horse. Samuel and Ellie exchanged glances, understanding dawning between them. This wasn't coincidence, it was calculation. Brandon Miller was trying to distract him from Phantom's training, ensuring Samuel would fail to meet the new deadline. I see, Samuel said, his decision crystallizing in that moment. I'm afraid I'll have to decline, Ms. Roberts. I've committed to my current project, and I won't compromise it for any amount. Claire's pleasant expression faltered slightly. Are you sure? This is a very generous offer. I'm sure, Samuel replied firmly, but I appreciate you coming all this way. After she departed, Ellie stared at Samuel in disbelief. You just turned down enough money to save the ranch. No, Samuel corrected quietly. I turned down a bribe to fail a horse that needs me. There's a difference. With that, he walked back toward the barn where Phantom waited, his steps heavier than before but his resolve stronger than ever. 1 week to prove his methods could work. 1 week to save a horse that deserved better than becoming another casualty of human impatience. The ranch might be lost, but Samuel Hayes would not compromise the principles that had guided his life. Not for Brandon Miller, not for Claire Roberts, not for anyone. Sunday dawned with a sense of urgency that Samuel hadn't felt in years. 1 week to prove his methods to Brandon Miller. 18 days to save what remained of Whispering Pines. The dual deadlines weighed on him as he moved through his morning routine, feeding the horses and checking fences with mechanical precision while his mind raced ahead. The paperwork for Martin's purchase of the back 40 was being processed, but the money wouldn't arrive for several days, and it wouldn't be enough on its own. Without another source of income, Samuel would still lose the heart of the ranch, including the house his grandfather had built and the training facilities where he'd spent his life working with troubled horses. By mid-morning, Samuel was in the round pen with Phantom, continuing the slow process of building trust. The horse moved with greater confidence today, following Samuel's subtle cues without hesitation. "That's it, boy," Samuel murmured, as Phantom navigated around a small obstacle course of barrels and poles. "You've got the idea now." "He looks good," came Ellie's voice from the fence. She'd arrived earlier than usual, concern evident in her expression. "Any word from the Millers today?" Samuel shook his head. "Not expecting them until next Saturday. Madison usually comes on her own, but after yesterday." He trailed off, uncertain whether Brandon would even allow his daughter to continue visiting. "What's the plan, then, for this final week?" Samuel guided Phantom toward the gate where Ellie stood. "We keep going, one step at a time. Today I want to try something new." He produced a light saddle pad from behind the fence. "Time to see if he'll accept this on his back." Ellie's eyebrows rose. "You sure that's not pushing too fast?" "We're not putting a saddle on him yet, just introducing the concept." "Besides," Samuel added with a grim smile, "Miller wants progress. This would qualify if Phantom's ready." Working with patient precision, Samuel allowed Phantom to examine the pad thoroughly, sniffing and even mouthing it to satisfy his curiosity. When the horse seemed comfortable, Samuel lifted the pad slowly toward his back. Phantom tensed immediately, sidestepping away with a nervous snort. "Easy now," Samuel soothed, lowering the pad. "No rush. We'll try again." It took 3 attempts before Phantom would stand still while Samuel raised the pad to his eye level. By the 4th try, the horse allowed Samuel to lightly touch his shoulder with it. But when Samuel attempted to place it on Phantom's back, the horse spun away, eyes wide with remembered fear. "That's enough for now," Samuel decided, setting the pad aside. "We'll end on what he can handle, not what he can't." Ellie helped him return Phantom to his stall, both of them quiet with their own thoughts. As they walked back to the house for lunch, Samuel's phone rang. It was Madison. "Mr. Hayes?" Her voice was hushed, almost a whisper. "I'm calling from school. Dad took my car keys after yesterday. Said I couldn't come to the ranch this week without him." Samuel's heart sank. "I'm sorry to hear that, Madison." "It's not fair," she continued, frustration evident even in her whispers. "Phantom was doing so well. I saw it, even if Dad couldn't." "Your father has his own ideas about training," Samuel said carefully, aware that criticizing Brandon to his daughter would only make the situation worse. "He's wrong about this," Madison insisted. "And now he's talking to that Jameson guy every day, making plans for when Phantom fails your program. He's not even giving you a fair chance." Samuel wasn't surprised, but the confirmation still stung. "Madison, I want you to know that whatever happens, I'll do my best for Phantom this week. I won't give up on him." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Hayes, is there any way I could come see him, without Dad knowing?" The question gave Samuel pause. He understood her attachment to Phantom, but encouraging her to deceive her father seemed wrong, even if Brandon's approach was misguided. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said gently. "Your father's still your father, and going behind his back would only make things worse when he found out." Madison sighed, a sound of resignation that seemed too heavy for a 17-year-old. "I guess you're right, but will you at least call me? Let me know how Phantom's doing." "I can do that," Samuel promised. "And Madison, don't give up hope yet. A lot can happen in a week." After hanging up, he found Ellie watching him with a troubled expression. "Miller's isolating her from the horse," she guessed. Samuel nodded. "And from us. Making sure she can't see the progress we're making." "That's low, even for him." "It's strategic," Samuel corrected. "He wants Phantom with Jameson, so he's stacking the deck. Classic move for a businessman." They entered the kitchen, where Samuel mechanically assembled sandwiches while his mind worked through the implications. Without Madison's influence, Brandon would be even less receptive to Samuel's methods. And without Madison's natural rapport with Phantom, the horse's progress might slow. "We need a new approach," Samuel said finally. "Something that even Miller can't dismiss." "Like what?" Ellie asked around a mouthful of sandwich. Samuel stared out the window, his food untouched. I'm not sure yet, but we've got 6 days to figure it out. Monday brought a setback. Samuel arrived at the barn to find Phantom pacing his stall, eyes rolling with anxiety. The horse had been calm the night before. Something had happened in the interim to trigger this regression. What's going on, boy? Samuel murmured, approaching the stall cautiously. Phantom snorted, backing away with his ears flattened. The progress of the past weeks seemed to have evaporated overnight. Ellie arrived to find Samuel sitting outside the stall, keeping a quiet vigil as Phantom continued his agitated pacing. What happened? She asked, taking in the scene with concern. Don't know, Samuel replied. Found him like this at dawn. Something spooked him badly. They examined the barn together, looking for anything unusual, a snake, a predator's tracks, something that might explain Phantom's sudden fear. It was Ellie who spotted the cigarette butt near the back door, a brand neither of them smoked. Someone was here last night, she said, holding up the evidence. After you left. Samuel's expression darkened. Check the security cameras. The ranch's security system was modest. Just 2 cameras covering the main barn area, installed after attack theft years earlier. Samuel rarely bothered to check the footage, but now he and Ellie huddled around the small monitor in his office, rewinding to the previous night. The timestamp read 2:17 a.m. when a figure appeared on the screen, moving with purpose toward Phantom's stall. The resolution was poor, the lighting worse, but they could make out a man of average height wearing a baseball cap pulled low. Can't see his face, Ellie muttered. They watched as the intruder approached Phantom's stall, the horse immediately backing away in alarm. The man reached into his pocket and extracted what looked like a small device. A moment later, Phantom reared in his stall, clearly panicked. A cattle prod, Samuel growled, his hands clenching into fists. He used a cattle prod on him. The footage showed the man watching Phantom's terror for several seconds before casually walking out the way he had come. The entire incident lasted less than 5 minutes. Who would do this? Ellie asked, though they both suspected the answer. Someone who wants to make sure I fail, Samuel replied grimly. Someone working for Miller, or maybe Jameson himself. We should call the sheriff, Ellie insisted. This is trespassing, animal cruelty. And report what? A grainy video of someone we can't identify? Samuel shook his head. Besides, getting the law involved would only complicate things for Phantom. Miller would pull him immediately, claim I was making excuses for my failure. So we just let them get away with it? Ellie's voice rose with indignation. No. Samuel's tone was steel. We adjust, double the night checks, take turns sleeping in the barn if we have to, and we help Phantom recover from this setback. It took the entire day to calm Phantom enough for Samuel to enter his stall. By evening, the horse was accepting apples from Samuel's hand again, though still jumpy at sudden movements. The cruel act had cost them precious time in an already tight schedule. Tuesday and Wednesday were devoted to rebuilding the trust that had been damaged. Samuel worked with Phantom for hours each day, re-establishing the foundation they had created over the past weeks. Ellie took the night shift, sleeping on a cot in the tack room to ensure no more midnight visitors disturbed the horse's recovery. By Thursday, Phantom was once again following Samuel in the round pen, though with more hesitation than before. Samuel resumed work with the saddle pad, and to his surprise, Phantom seemed less resistant than he had been on Sunday. Perhaps, Samuel reflected, the contrast between his gentle handling and the cruelty of the cattle prod had actually clarified for Phantom who could be trusted. Look at that, Ellie remarked from her perch on the fence rail. He's letting you touch his back with it now. It was true. Phantom stood calmly as Samuel gently placed the pad on his back, leaving it there for a few seconds before removing it. The horse's ears remained forward, his breathing steady, signs that he was accepting this new experience rather than merely enduring it. Progress, Samuel agreed, rewarding Phantom with an apple and gentle praise. Real progress. Enough to impress Miller? Ellie asked, voicing the question that haunted their efforts. Samuel sighed. Hard to say. A real horseman would see the significance. But Miller, he's expecting Phantom to be competition ready. This is still a long way from that. Friday brought rain again, confining their work to the barn. Samuel used the opportunity to introduce Phantom to new experiences, different brushes, a soft rope draped over his back, the sound of clippers, turned on but not used. With each new challenge, the horse showed increasing confidence, looking to Samuel for reassurance rather than reacting with blind fear. In the afternoon, Samuel's phone rang. It was Brandon Miller. "Mr. Hayes," he began without preamble. "I'm calling to confirm our appointment tomorrow morning." 10 o'clock, Samuel replied, keeping his voice neutral. "Will Madison be joining you?" "Yes, though I'd appreciate it if you didn't mention our arrangement to her. She's quite attached to the horse, as you know, and I'd rather she didn't get her hopes up unnecessarily." Samuel bit back a retort about whose fault it was that Madison's hopes needed managing. "I understand. See you both tomorrow, then." After hanging up, he stared at the phone for a long moment, a plan forming in his mind. Brandon Miller wanted a demonstration that would prove the effectiveness of Samuel's methods, or their failure. Either way, it would need to be something unmistakable, something even a non-horseman couldn't dismiss. "Ellie," he called, finding her in the feed room. "I need your help with something. A bit of a gamble, but it might be our only shot." She listened as he outlined his idea, her eyes widening. "That's risky, Samuel. For you and for Phantom." "I know," he admitted. "But Miller's already made up his mind. If we don't try something dramatic, Phantom goes to Jameson on Sunday. This is his last chance." Ellie considered this, then nodded slowly. "All right, I'm in. What do you need me to do?" As they worked out the details of tomorrow's demonstration, Samuel was acutely aware of the risk he was taking. If his plan failed, it would only confirm Brandon's belief that his methods were ineffective. But if it succeeded, if Phantom rose to the occasion, it might be enough to buy the horse more time. And time, Samuel reminded himself as he watched Phantom dozing peacefully in his stall, was the one thing both of them desperately needed. Saturday morning arrived with a tense stillness that seemed to settle over Whispering Pines like a shroud. Samuel was awake before dawn, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold between his calloused hands. His mind churned through every detail of the plan he and Ellie had devised. A demonstration that would either convince Brandon Miller of Phantom's progress or confirm the man's determination to send the horse to Tyler Jameson. The click of nails on hardwood announced the arrival of Old Blue, Samuel's aging border collie, who placed his chin on Samuel's knee with a concerned whine. "Just thinking, boy," Samuel murmured, scratching the dog's ears. "Big day ahead." At first light, he made his way to the barn where Ellie was already checking on Phantom. The horse greeted Samuel with a soft nicker, another sign of the trust they'd built despite the setback caused by the midnight intruder. "He seems calm," Ellie observed. "Ready for today?" Samuel nodded, his expression solemn. "As ready as he can be. We'll keep things quiet until Miller arrives. No point stressing him beforehand." They spent the next few hours preparing the round pen and adjacent paddock for the demonstration. Samuel had chosen the larger paddock deliberately. It would give Phantom more space if he became anxious, but it also raised the stakes of what Samuel planned to attempt. "The saddle's ready," Ellie reported, returning from the tack room with a well-worn Western saddle that was lighter than Phantom's likely competition gear. "Are you sure about this, Samuel? It's a big jump from a saddle pad to a full saddle and rider." "Not sure at all," Samuel admitted, checking the cinch straps. "But Miller wants proof of progress. This is the only kind he'll recognize." By 9:30, everything was in place. Phantom had been groomed until his black coat gleamed in the morning sun. The paddock had been raked smooth, and Samuel had changed into his good shirt, a concession to the importance of the occasion rather than an attempt to impress Brandon Miller. "They're here," Ellie called from the fence where she'd been keeping watch. Two vehicles pulled into the yard, Brandon's SUV in the lead, Madison's sedan following behind. Samuel took a deep breath, centering himself. "Showtime," he murmured to Phantom, who watched him with alert, intelligent eyes. "Let's show them what you can do." Brandon emerged from his vehicle first, dressed in pressed jeans and a button-down shirt that suggested he'd come directly from another engagement. Madison followed, her face lighting up at the sight of the barn where Phantom waited. "Mr. Hayes," Brandon greeted with practiced cordiality. "I trust you're ready to demonstrate Phantom's progress?" "I am," Samuel replied, matching the businessman's formal tone. "But first, I'd like to explain what you're about to see." He led them to the small seating area beside the paddock, where Ellie had set up chairs and a small table with cold drinks, a touch of hospitality that seemed to surprise Brandon. "Over the past 2 weeks," Samuel began, "Phantom has made significant progress in overcoming his fear of humans. He's accepting handling, following commands, and generally showing signs of the exceptional horse he was bred to be." "That's wonderful," Madison interjected, her enthusiasm evident. "Can I see him?" Samuel nodded. "In a moment. What I want you both to understand is that Phantom's rehabilitation isn't about tricks or obedience. It's about rebuilding his capacity to trust. And trust can't be forced or rushed. It has to be earned, step by step." Brandon checked his watch with poorly concealed impatience. "I appreciate the philosophy lesson, Mr. Hayes, but I'm here to see tangible results. Can Phantom be ridden yet? Is he any closer to being suitable for Madison's competitions?" "That's what I intend to show you today," Samuel replied, unruffled by Brandon's dismissive tone. "But I need you to understand the context. 2 nights ago, someone broke into my barn and deliberately terrorized Phantom with a cattle prod." Brandon's expression shifted from impatience to shock. "What? That's illegal and cruel," Samuel finished. "And it set back our progress significantly. I have security footage if you'd like to see it." Madison gasped. "Who would do such a thing?" "I don't know," Samuel said, though his eyes remained fixed on Brandon, searching for any sign of complicity. "But whoever it was wanted to ensure Phantom would fail this evaluation." Brandon's face flushed, but his voice remained steady. "Are you suggesting I had something to do with this?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Samuel replied calmly. "I'm explaining the challenges we've faced, so you can properly evaluate what you're about to see." Before Brandon could respond, Ellie appeared leading Phantom into the paddock. The horse moved with alert confidence, his coat gleaming in the sunlight, head held high but not with the anxious tension that had characterized him when he first arrived. "He looks amazing," Madison breathed, moving toward the fence. Phantom's ears swiveled toward her, recognizing her voice. He nickered softly, approaching the fence where she stood. "He remembers you," Samuel said, joining Madison. "That's good. Would you like to enter the paddock with him?" Madison looked to her father, who gave a reluctant nod. With careful movements, she opened the gate and stepped inside. Phantom remained calm, watching her with intelligent interest rather than fear. "Talk to him," Samuel instructed. "Let him hear your voice." Madison began speaking softly to the horse, telling him how beautiful he looked, how much she'd missed him. As she spoke, Phantom gradually moved closer until he was standing beside her, his massive frame dwarfing the teenager, but his manner gentle and attentive. "Can I touch him?" she asked, barely containing her excitement. "Let him come to you," Samuel advised. Madison stood still, hand outstretched. After a moment's consideration, Phantom lowered his head and pressed his muzzle into her palm, eliciting a delighted laugh from the girl. "This is already significant progress," Samuel explained to Brandon, who was watching with grudging interest. 2 weeks ago, Phantom wouldn't allow anyone but me to touch him. Now he's seeking contact. "It's impressive," Brandon admitted, "but a long way from rideable." "That's the next part of our demonstration," Samuel said, nodding to Ellie, who brought forward the saddle and pad. "Madison, would you mind stepping out for a moment while we introduce these?" Once Madison had rejoined her father, Samuel began the careful process of familiarizing Phantom with the saddle. The horse tensed when he first saw it, but didn't bolt, another sign of progress. With slow, deliberate movements, Samuel placed the pad on Phantom's back, then the saddle, taking care to let the horse see and smell each item before it touched him. "He's accepting the saddle," Brandon observed, a note of surprise in his voice. "He is," Samuel agreed. "But this is where it gets tricky. Phantom's previous trauma seems specifically connected to being ridden. Putting weight on his back might trigger his fear response." "So you're not going to ride him?" Brandon's disappointment was evident. "I didn't say that." Samuel tightened the cinch, checking Phantom's reaction with each adjustment. The horse remained tense but cooperative. "What I'm saying is that this next step is a calculated risk. It might work, or it might set us back." Brandon leaned forward, suddenly engaged. "You're going to ride him now, after just 2 weeks?" "Not me," Samuel said, turning to face them fully. "Madison." The silence that followed was absolute. Madison's eyes widened in astonishment, while her father's face darkened with immediate disapproval. "Absolutely not," Brandon declared. "That horse is dangerous. I won't risk my daughter's safety on your unproven methods." "Dad, wait," Madison interjected. "Mr. Hayes wouldn't suggest it if he thought Phantom would hurt me." "She's right," Samuel confirmed. "I've worked with troubled horses for 50 years. I wouldn't put Madison at risk if I didn't believe Phantom was ready for this step." Brandon's jaw tightened. "And if you're wrong? If he bucks her off or worse?" "That's why we're in the paddock, not the round pen," Samuel explained. "More space for control. Ellie and I will both be present, and Madison will be wearing full safety gear." He gestured to where Ellie was already setting out a helmet and protective vest. "Please, Dad," Madison pleaded. "This is what we've been working toward. I trust Mr. Hayes, and I trust Phantom." Brandon looked torn, his paternal instinct warring with his desire to see the expensive horse fulfilling its intended purpose. Finally, he turned to Samuel with a hard stare. "If anything happens to her, anything at all, you're done. Not just with Phantom, but with your entire career. I'll see to it personally." Samuel met his gaze without flinching. "Understood." The next 15 minutes were devoted to preparation. Madison donned the safety vest and helmet while Samuel continued working with Phantom, keeping the horse calm and focused. Ellie positioned herself strategically in the paddock, ready to intervene if necessary. "Remember what I taught you," Samuel told Madison as he helped her approach Phantom with the bridle. "Slow movements, clear intentions, no hesitation." Madison nodded, her expression a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she carefully slipped the bridle over Phantom's head. The horse accepted it with only minimal resistance. Another small victory. "Good," Samuel encouraged. "Now I'm going to help you mount. No sudden movements. Let him feel your weight gradually." Brandon watched from the fence, his knuckles white where he gripped the top rail. Ellie stood nearby with a lead rope, ready to catch Phantom if needed, though she remained out of the horse's immediate sight line to avoid adding pressure. With Samuel's assistance, Madison placed her foot in the stirrup and slowly eased herself up, pausing when she was half-mounted to let Phantom adjust to the sensation. The horse tensed, his muscles bunching beneath the saddle, but he didn't spook. "That's it," Samuel murmured, one hand steadying Madison, the other on Phantom's neck. "Easy now." In one fluid motion, Madison swung her leg over and settled into the saddle. Phantom froze for a moment, his entire body rigid with apprehension. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the explosion of fear that seemed inevitable. Instead, Phantom exhaled deeply and took a tentative step forward, then another. Madison remained still, allowing him to adjust to her weight. When he seemed steady, she gently squeezed with her calves, using the lightest pressure to ask him to walk on. The black horse responded, moving forward in a hesitant but willing walk. Madison guided him in a wide circle around the paddock, her movements minimal and precise. With each completed circuit, Phantom's stride grew more confident, his ears flickering back to listen for Madison's quiet words of encouragement. "Would you look at that?" Ellie whispered, moving to stand beside Samuel. "He's actually enjoying it." It was true. The tension had melted from Phantom's frame, replaced by the natural grace that had made him valuable in the first place. He wasn't just tolerating Madison, he was partnering with her, responding to her subtle cues with increasing willingness. Samuel glanced at Brandon, whose expression had transformed from skepticism to undisguised amazement. "That's what I've been working toward, Mr. Miller. Not just a rideable horse, but a willing partnership." After several minutes of walking, Madison gently guided Phantom back to where her father and Samuel stood. The horse halted smoothly, standing calm and collected with the teenager on his back, an image of harmony that would have seemed impossible just 2 weeks earlier. "Well?" Madison asked, her face flushed with triumph. "What do you think, Dad?" Brandon Miller, for once, seemed at a loss for words. "I think," he said finally, "that I may have underestimated Mr. Hayes's methods." As Madison dismounted with Samuel's assistance, the connection between girl and horse remained palpable. Phantom lowered his head, gently nuzzling her shoulder in a gesture of unmistakable trust. Samuel watched them together, feeling the weight of the past 2 weeks lifting slightly from his shoulders. It wasn't a complete victory. Phantom still had a long journey ahead, and the ranch's future remained uncertain. But it was a moment of vindication that no one, not even Brandon Miller, could deny. "So," Samuel said, turning to face the businessman directly, "about that deadline of yours." Brandon Miller stared at Samuel, his businessman's composure momentarily fractured by what he had just witnessed. Madison was still flushed with triumph, one arm draped over Phantom's neck as the horse stood placidly beside her. The very picture of the partnership Samuel had promised was possible. "I think," Brandon said finally, choosing his words with unusual care, "that we need to reevaluate our timeline." Samuel maintained a neutral expression, though the relief coursing through him was almost dizzying. "I'm listening." "Obviously, there's been progress," Brandon conceded, gesturing toward Madison and Phantom. "More than I expected, frankly. But Madison's first qualifying event is still in 6 weeks. Is that enough time?" Before Samuel could answer, Madison stepped forward, her hand still resting on Phantom's neck. "Dad, I don't care about Wellington anymore." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I mean, I do, but not if it means rushing Phantom. I'd rather build a real relationship with him than push for a competition he's not ready for." Brandon looked genuinely taken aback. "Madison, we've invested—" "I know how much we've invested," she interrupted. "But you saw what just happened. That wasn't just a horse tolerating a rider. That was the beginning of something special." She turned to Samuel. "Isn't it?" Samuel nodded, a hint of pride softening his weathered features. "You've got good instincts, Madison. What you felt out there, that willing connection, that's what makes a true partnership with a horse. It can't be rushed or forced, only cultivated." Brandon looked from his daughter to Samuel, then back to Phantom, who was calmly accepting Madison's affectionate pats. The businessman sighed, running a hand through his carefully styled hair. "All right. Let's say I'm convinced that your methods have merit, Mr. Hayes. What do you propose from here?" Samuel considered his answer carefully, knowing that the next few minutes could determine not just Phantom's fate, but potentially the future of Whispering Pines as well. "I propose we continue as we've been doing, with Madison involved as much as possible. Phantom trusts her now, and that trust will be the foundation for everything else. In another month, I believe he could be ready for basic flat work. Walking, trotting, simple transitions. But jumping—" He shook his head. "That's still months away, if ever." Brandon frowned. "Months? Madison's entire competitive season will be over by then." "Dad," Madison said softly, "there will be other seasons, other competitions." Brandon looked at his daughter, really looked at her, perhaps seeing for the first time not the child whose ambitions he'd been financing, but the young woman with her own values and priorities. "You really care about this horse, don't you?" he asked. Madison nodded, her eyes suspiciously bright. "I do, and I care about doing right by him, even if that means sitting out this season." A complex emotion passed across Brandon's face. Pride mingled with something like regret. "Well," he said after a moment, "I suppose we can discuss alternatives for this season. Perhaps lease another competition horse temporarily, while Phantom continues his training." The suggestion was so reasonable, so unexpected from the demanding businessman they'd come to know, that both Samuel and Ellie exchanged surprised glances. "That's actually a sensible approach," Samuel agreed cautiously. "It would give Madison competitive experience while allowing Phantom the time he needs." "And you'd continue working with him, both of you?" Brandon asked, looking from Samuel to Madison. "Absolutely," Madison replied immediately. Samuel nodded. "For as long as it takes." Brandon seemed to come to a decision. "All right then. We'll extend our arrangement, Mr. Hayes. Same terms as before, half now, half upon completion." "And what defines completion in this new timeline?" Samuel asked, wary of any hidden conditions. "Let's say 3 more months of training, with progress evaluations every 2 weeks. My goal is for Phantom to be fully rehabilitated by the end of the summer, even if he's not competition ready." It was more reasonable than Samuel had dared hope for. The additional payment would help with the ranch's financial situation, though it wouldn't solve it entirely. But more importantly, Phantom would be spared the trauma of Jameson's harsh methods. "Agreed," Samuel said, extending his hand. As they shook on it, Madison impulsively hugged her father. "Thank you, Dad. You won't regret this." After helping Madison remove Phantom's tack and return him to his stall with a well-deserved treat, Samuel walked the Millers to their vehicles. Madison lingered behind, speaking to her father in low tones that Samuel couldn't quite catch. After a moment, Brandon nodded and returned to his SUV, leaving Madison to approach Samuel alone. "Mr. Hayes," she began, a hesitant smile on her face. "I was wondering if I could ask a favor." "Of course," Samuel replied. "Dad's agreed to let me come out every day after school next week, to help with Phantom. Would that be okay with you?" Samuel smiled. "More than okay. Phantom responds well to you. The more time you spend together, the stronger your bond will grow." Madison beamed, then impulsively hugged Samuel just as she had her father. "Thank you for not giving up on him," she whispered. After the Millers departed, Samuel found Ellie in the barn office, already updating Phantom's training records with notes from the morning session. "So," she said without looking up, "crisis averted?" "For now," Samuel replied, sinking into the worn leather chair behind the desk. "Though I'm still not convinced Miller wasn't behind that midnight visitor with the cattle prod." Ellie closed the ledger and faced him directly. "You really think he'd go that far? Deliberately sabotage his own investment?" Samuel shrugged. "People do strange things when their pride is on the line, and Miller strikes me as a man who doesn't like being wrong." "Well, whether he was involved or not, the important thing is that Phantom gets to stay here, with you and Madison." Ellie's smile faded slightly. "What about the ranch, though? Miller's payment helps, but combined with Martin's offer—" "It's still not enough," Samuel confirmed, the momentary elation of the morning's success giving way to the persistent reality of his financial situation. "But it buys us time, and sometimes that's all you need." Later that afternoon, while Ellie was exercising one of the other horses, Samuel received an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Tom Decker pulled up in his patrol car, his expression serious as he approached the porch where Samuel was replacing a loose board. "Afternoon, Samuel," he greeted, removing his hat. "Got a minute?" Samuel set down his hammer. "Always got time for the law. Something wrong?" "Maybe. Mind if I see that security footage you mentioned to Martin Webb? About the intruder with the cattle prod?" Samuel's eyebrows rose in surprise. "How'd you hear about that?" "Small town," Decker replied with a shrug. "Word gets around. Martin mentioned it to his brother-in-law who plays poker with my deputy." Samuel led the sheriff to the barn office where he queued up the footage. They watched in silence as the grainy image showed the intruder entering, approaching Phantom's stall, and using the cattle prod on the unsuspecting horse. "Bastard," Decker muttered, his weathered face hardening. "Any idea who it might be?" "Had my suspicions," Samuel admitted, "but nothing concrete. Face is too obscured to make an ID." Decker nodded thoughtfully. "Resolution's poor, but I'm noticing something about his walk. See that slight hitch in his step? Like his right leg's a bit stiff." Samuel peered at the screen. Now that you mention it, yeah. Reminds me of someone. Decker rubbed his chin. Tyler Jameson had a rodeo accident about 10 years back. Broke his femur in 3 places. Walks with that same kind of hitch now. Samuel's eyes narrowed. Jameson. He's a trainer over in Oklahoma. Brandon Miller's been talking to him about taking over Phantom's rehabilitation. Interesting coincidence, Decker mused. Jameson was spotted at the Hill Country Motel 2 nights ago, checked out yesterday morning. The implication hung in the air between them. If Jameson had been in town the night of the incident, and if he stood to gain from Phantom's failure under Samuel's care. Hard to prove anything from this footage alone, Decker continued. But I'll look into it. In the meantime, might want to beef up your security. Camera at the back entrance too, maybe. After the sheriff left, Samuel found himself standing at Phantom's stall, watching the horse doze peacefully in the afternoon sunlight. The thought of Jameson deliberately terrorizing the animal to secure a training contract filled him with a cold anger he hadn't felt in years. He won't get near you again, Samuel promised quietly. That's a guarantee. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, a welcome respite after the tension of the previous day. Samuel was enjoying a rare second cup of coffee on his porch when Martin Webb's truck pulled up the drive. His neighbor approached with an envelope in hand and a solemn expression. "Morning, Samuel," he called. "Got the paperwork finalized yesterday. Banks approved the transaction." Samuel set down his coffee, a complicated mix of emotions stirring within him. The sale of the back 40 was both a lifeline and a defeat, necessary for the ranch's survival, but painful nonetheless. "Appreciate you pushing it through quickly, Martin," he said, accepting the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for the agreed amount, enough to cover most, though not all, of what he owed the bank. "It's good land," Martin said, his tone respectful of what the transaction meant to Samuel. "I'll take care of it. You have my word." "I know you will." Samuel tucked the check into his shirt pocket. "Never doubted that." After Martin left, Samuel remained on the porch, staring out at the rolling hills of Whispering Pines, now somewhat smaller but still his. With Miller's extension of Phantom's training and the partial payment that would come with it, combined with Martin's purchase, Samuel had enough to satisfy the bank for now. The immediate threat of foreclosure would be lifted, but the reprieve was temporary. In 3 months, when Phantom's extended training concluded, Samuel would be back where he started, land-rich but cash-poor, with a ranch that cost more to maintain than it generated in income. The sound of tires on gravel announced Ellie's arrival. She joined him on the porch, noting the envelope on the table with a questioning look. "Martin brought the check," Samuel explained. "It's done." Ellie nodded, understanding the weight behind those simple words. "And Miller's payment?" "He'll wire it tomorrow. Between the two, we'll keep the wolves from the door. For now." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, both contemplating the uncertain future that still loomed despite the day's small victory. "You know," Ellie said finally, "what you did yesterday with Phantom and Madison, that was something special. Not many trainers would have taken that risk." Samuel shrugged. "Wasn't as big a risk as it looked. I knew Phantom was ready, knew Madison was too." "Still," Ellie persisted, "it changed Miller's mind when nothing else would have. Made him see the value in your methods." "Maybe," Samuel conceded. "Or maybe he just saw his daughter happy and didn't want to take that away from her. Either way, it worked. Phantom stays, your methods vindicated, Miller's check clearing tomorrow." Ellie smiled. "Not bad for a week's work." Samuel returned her smile, albeit with a hint of reservation. "We've won the battle, not the war. Still got a lot of work ahead with Phantom. And the ranch? One problem at a time," Ellie reminded him, echoing his own words from days earlier. "Today, let's just appreciate that Phantom's safe, Madison's happy, and Whispering Pines is still yours." As if to punctuate her statement, Phantom's welcoming nicker carried across the yard from the barn, reminding them both of the morning feeding that awaited. Samuel rose, feeling the familiar ache in his knees, but also a renewed sense of purpose. One problem at a time, one day at a time. It had been his approach to training troubled horses for 50 years, and it would be his approach to the challenges that still lay ahead. For Phantom, for the ranch, and for himself. 2 months passed in the steady rhythm of training that Samuel had practiced his entire life. Each day brought small victories with Phantom, a new skill mastered, another fear overcome, another step toward becoming the horse he was meant to be, rather than the traumatized animal Brandon Miller had delivered to Whispering Pines. Madison kept her promise, visiting nearly every day after school and spending her weekends at the ranch. Under Samuel's patient guidance, she and Phantom developed a partnership that went beyond the typical rider-horse relationship. They communicated in the subtle language of mutual trust that Samuel had spent his career teaching others to recognize and respect. By mid-July, Phantom was accepting regular saddling and rides in the paddock, his movements fluid and willing, where once they had been tense and resistant. Madison had progressed from simple walking to trotting, and they had even attempted a few gentle canters on the days when Phantom seemed most confident. "He's like a different horse," Ellie remarked one evening as she and Samuel watched Madison cooling Phantom down after a particularly good session. "If you'd told me 2 months ago that he'd be cantering willingly with a rider, I'd have called you crazy." Samuel nodded, a quiet pride warming his chest. He had it in him all along, just needed someone to listen instead of demanding. Brandon Miller had kept his word as well, visiting every 2 weeks to observe Phantom's progress. His initial skepticism had gradually given way to genuine interest in Samuel's methods, though he remained a businessman at heart, always asking about timelines and tangible outcomes. During his most recent visit, he'd stood at the paddock fence watching Madison guide Phantom through a series of transitions between gaits, the horse responding to her subtle cues with remarkable sensitivity. "I underestimated you, Mr. Hayes," Brandon had admitted, his tone more respectful than Samuel had ever heard it. "What you've accomplished with Phantom, it's impressive." "What Madison has accomplished," Samuel had corrected gently. "She's got a gift with horses, reminds me of myself at her age." Brandon had considered this, watching his daughter with new eyes. "She's always loved riding, but this is different. I've never seen her so connected to an animal before." "That connection is what makes a great horsewoman," Samuel had told him. "Not ribbons or trophies, though she could win plenty of those too, given time." Now, as July turned to August and the final month of their agreement approached, Samuel found himself facing a bittersweet reality. Phantom's rehabilitation was succeeding beyond his most optimistic expectations, but the ranch's financial situation remained precarious. Martin's purchase of the back 40, combined with Brandon's payments, had satisfied the bank temporarily. The foreclosure notice had been withdrawn, the immediate threat averted, but the underlying problem remained. Whispering Pines cost more to maintain than it generated in income. Samuel sat at his kitchen table late one night, poring over account books by the dim light of a single lamp. The numbers hadn't changed, no matter how many times he rearranged them. Without another significant source of income, he would face the same crisis again within 6 months. A knock at the door startled him from his calculations. It was nearly 10 o'clock, too late for casual visitors. "Who is it?" he called, moving cautiously to the door. "It's me," came Madison's voice. "Sorry it's so late." Samuel opened the door to find Madison standing on his porch, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Everything all right? Can we talk?" she asked. "It's important." He ushered her inside, noting that she'd driven herself, a sign that Brandon wasn't aware of this visit. "Your father know you're here?" Madison shook her head. "He thinks I'm at a study group. I needed to speak with you alone first." Samuel gestured toward the kitchen table, clearing away his financial paperwork. "Sounds serious." "It is. At least it is to me." Madison took a seat, clasping her hands in front of her. "I've been thinking a lot about the future, about college, and what comes after." "Veterinary school, right?" Samuel recalled her earlier mention of Cornell. "That was the plan. But these past months, working with you and Phantom, it's changed things for me." She took a deep breath. I want to learn what you know, Mr. Hayes. Not just about training horses, but about understanding them, about building relationships with them instead of just riding them. Samuel studied her earnest face, seeing the same passion that had driven him at her age. That's not something you learn in a classroom, Madison. It takes years of experience. I know. That's why... She hesitated, then plunged ahead. That's why I want to defer college for a year. Work with you instead, like an apprenticeship. The request caught Samuel by surprise. Have you discussed this with your father? Madison grimaced. Not yet. He's set on Cornell in the fall. 4 years of pre-vet, then veterinary school. It's been the plan since I was 15. And now you're having doubts? Not doubts exactly. I still want to work with animals. But after seeing what you do, how you connect with horses that everyone else has given up on, I can't imagine going straight to college without learning more about that first. Samuel leaned back in his chair, considering her words carefully. An apprenticeship isn't glamorous work, Madison. It's mucking stalls at dawn, mending fences in the rain, long hours with difficult animals that test your patience every day. I know, she insisted. I've been doing some of that already, and I love it, even the hard parts. And your father? He's invested a lot in your education. Madison sighed. That's the part I'm struggling with. He won't understand. He sees everything as steps on a career ladder: college, veterinary school, professional practice. Taking a year to learn something that doesn't come with a degree, he'll see it as throwing away opportunities. Samuel understood the dilemma all too well. Brandon Miller valued credentials and measurable outcomes. The kind of knowledge Samuel could offer, intuitive, experiential, impossible to quantify, wouldn't register as valuable in Brandon's worldview. Why come to me before talking to him? Samuel asked. Because I needed to know if it was even possible, Madison admitted. Would you be willing to take me on? Teach me what you know? The question hung in the air between them, fraught with implications Samuel couldn't ignore. Taking Madison as an apprentice would mean potential conflict with Brandon, who, despite his recent respect for Samuel's methods, still held considerable influence over his daughter's future. It would also mean committing to keeping Whispering Pines operational for at least another year, a financial challenge he wasn't sure he could meet. Yet looking at Madison's hopeful expression, Samuel saw something rare and worth nurturing, a genuine calling to the work that had defined his own life. Let me think on it, he said finally. This isn't just about what I'm willing to do. It's about what's best for you, for your father, and yes, for Whispering Pines too. Madison nodded, though disappointment flickered across her face. I understand. When will you decide? Soon, Samuel promised. But Madison, whatever I say, you need to have an honest conversation with your father. This is your life, but he's still your father. He deserves to hear your thoughts directly from you. After Madison left, Samuel returned to his financial paperwork with a new perspective. If he were to take on an apprentice, especially one as promising as Madison, he'd need to ensure the ranch's survival beyond the next few months. That meant finding a sustainable source of income, not just temporary reprieves. The next morning, Samuel was surprised to find Brandon Miller's SUV pulling into the ranch yard shortly after dawn. The businessman emerged looking uncharacteristically disheveled, his usual polished appearance replaced by a rumpled shirt and uncombed hair. Miller, Samuel greeted cautiously. Didn't expect you today. Where is she? Brandon demanded without preamble. Who? Madison. Her bed wasn't slept in. Her car's gone. She's not answering her phone. Samuel frowned. She was here last night, but she left around 11, said she was heading home. Brandon's face paled. She never made it. I've been driving around all night looking for her. Alarm rippled through Samuel. Have you called the sheriff? Not yet. I hoped, she might be here. Brandon ran a hand through his hair, genuine fear replacing his usual confident demeanor. We had an argument yesterday, about college. She mentioned something about wanting to delay enrollment, work with horses instead. I didn't take it well. The pieces clicked into place for Samuel. Madison must have gone home after their conversation, attempted to discuss her plans with her father, and then, what? Run away after the argument turned heated? "Let me get Ellie," Samuel said, reaching for his phone. "We'll help you look." Within the hour, a search party had assembled at Whispering Pines. Sheriff Decker coordinated efforts with his deputies while Ellie organized local volunteers who knew the back roads and trails of the area. Brandon paced the yard, alternating between making phone calls to Madison's friends and staring anxiously down the drive as if willing her car to appear. Samuel approached him cautiously. "She mentioned wanting to apprentice with me. Learn horse training instead of going straight to college." Brandon's jaw tightened. "She mentioned it to me too. I told her it was out of the question, that we'd invested too much in her education to throw it away on what I do," Samuel finished for him, no judgment in his voice. "I understand your perspective, Brandon. Education matters, but so does following your heart. Madison has a gift with horses, a rare one, the kind that can't be taught in a classroom. So you're saying I should have just agreed? Let her abandon her future?" "I'm saying there might be room for compromise," Samuel replied. "A gap year, maybe. Time to explore this path before committing to another. Plenty of kids take a year between high school and college these days." Brandon shook his head, though with less certainty than before. "I just want what's best for her. A secure future. Opportunities I never had." "I know. That's what every good parent wants." Samuel glanced at the search teams preparing to depart. "But right now, let's focus on finding her. We can sort out the rest later." As Samuel prepared to join one of the search groups, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but he answered immediately, hoping it might be news about Madison. "Mr. Hayes?" The voice on the other end was female, unfamiliar. "This is Angela Reeves at Hill Country Memorial Hospital. We have a Madison Miller here. She's been in an accident." Samuel's heart dropped. "Is she all right?" "She's stable. Minor injuries only, thankfully. Her car went off the road last night during the storm. She's been asking for you, and for someone named Phantom. Her father's here with me. We'll come right away." Samuel ended the call and hurried to where Brandon was organizing a search team. They found her. She's at Hill Country Memorial. Car accident during last night's storm. The color drained from Brandon's face. "Is she—" "Minor injuries," Samuel assured him quickly. "She's asking for you, and for Phantom." The drive to the hospital was tense, both men lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, they found Madison in a hospital bed, her arm in a cast and a bandage across her forehead. Her face lit up when she saw them. "Dad, Mr. Hayes, I'm so sorry for worrying you." Her voice was hoarse but strong. "I was so upset after our fight, I just drove and drove. Then the storm hit, and there was a deer on the road." Brandon rushed to her side, all previous anger forgotten in the relief of finding his daughter alive. "Don't apologize. I'm just grateful you're okay." As father and daughter reconciled, Samuel hung back, giving them space. Yet his mind was already turning to what came next, for Madison, for Phantom, and for Whispering Pines Ranch. The accident had clarified something for him. Life was too short and too unpredictable to cling to old ways just because they were familiar. Perhaps it was time for Whispering Pines to evolve, just as he had helped countless troubled horses evolve beyond their fear and trauma. What that evolution might look like, he wasn't yet sure. But standing in that hospital room, watching the reunion between father and daughter, Samuel felt the first stirrings of an idea, one that might secure the future of his ranch while honoring its legacy. Autumn painted Whispering Pines in gold and crimson as September gave way to October. The sprawling oak behind the barn, the one Samuel's grandfather had planted nearly a century ago, blazed with color against the clear Texas sky. Standing beneath its branches, Samuel watched Madison putting Phantom through his paces in the paddock, marveling at how much had changed in the months since that black SUV had first rumbled up his driveway. Phantom moved with fluid grace, responding to Madison's subtle cues with the willing partnership that came from mutual trust. The horse that had once been deemed dangerous, unrideable, a lost cause, now carried himself with the dignity of an animal who had found his purpose and his place in the world. "Looking good," Ellie remarked, joining Samuel under the oak. "Hard to believe that's the same horse Brandon Miller dropped off back in spring." "Same horse," Samuel corrected, just with a different understanding of himself and his place in the world. "Philosophical this morning, aren't we?" Ellie teased, though her eyes reflected the same pride Samuel felt as they watched Madison guide Phantom through a gentle canter. The past 2 months had brought seismic changes to Whispering Pines. After Madison's accident, Brandon had stayed in town, postponing business trips and delegating responsibilities to spend time with his daughter during her recovery. Those quiet hospital days had given father and daughter space for honest conversations about future plans, dreams, and what truly mattered to each of them. To everyone's surprise, perhaps most of all his own, Brandon had been the one to propose a compromise. Madison would defer college for 1 year, apprenticing with Samuel at Whispering Pines to learn the fundamentals of his approach to horse training. After that, she would attend Cornell as planned, but with a clearer sense of how she might eventually integrate Samuel's methods with her veterinary education. What none of them had anticipated was Brandon's growing interest in the ranch itself. As he spent more time at Whispering Pines, accompanying Madison during her recovery and watching her work with Phantom, the businessman had begun asking questions about the operation, not just the horse training, but the financial side as well. "You're sitting on an untapped resource," he'd told Samuel one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Your methods, your experience, there's a market for that beyond one-on-one training." Samuel had been skeptical. "Been doing this 50 years, Miller. If there was a gold mine here, I'd have struck it by now." But Brandon had persisted, outlining possibilities that Samuel had never considered: weekend clinics for amateur horse owners, specialized workshops for professional trainers interested in rehabilitation techniques, even a book documenting Samuel's approach to working with troubled horses. "People are hungry for authenticity," Brandon had insisted, "for real wisdom, not just quick fixes and flashy techniques. What you do here, it has value beyond what you've recognized." Now, as October winds rustled the oak leaves overhead, that conversation had borne fruit in ways Samuel could never have imagined. The small office in the barn had been converted into a registration center for the first of what would become monthly workshops. 20 participants had signed up for the inaugural event, a 2-day intensive on building trust with troubled horses, featuring Phantom as the living example of what was possible. "First group arrives tomorrow," Ellie reminded him. "Everything ready?" Samuel nodded, though a flutter of nervousness stirred in his chest. Teaching one-on-one was one thing. Presenting his methods to a group was another entirely. "Ready as I'll ever be." "You'll be great," she assured him. "Just talk to them like you talk to me and Madison. Let your work speak for itself." In the paddock, Madison brought Phantom to a halt and dismounted with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable with her partner. The horse lowered his head, nudging her shoulder in what had become their post-ride ritual, a gesture of connection that never failed to warm Samuel's heart. Brandon's SUV appeared on the horizon, dust trailing behind it as it approached the ranch. Unlike his first visit, there was nothing intimidating about his arrival now. He had become a regular presence at Whispering Pines, dividing his time between Dallas business commitments and the ranch where his daughter was building a future different from the one he had envisioned for her, but no less valuable. "Right on time," Ellie noted as the vehicle pulled up beside Madison's sedan. Brandon emerged looking relaxed in casual clothes that would have seemed foreign on him 6 months earlier. He waved to Madison, who was leading Phantom back to the barn, then approached Samuel and Ellie with an envelope in hand. "Morning," he greeted. "Final registration numbers came in. We're at full capacity, plus a waiting list for next month." Samuel took the envelope, still somewhat amazed by the rapid transformation of Whispering Pines from struggling ranch to emerging educational center. The partnership with Brandon, formalized in contracts that Samuel had initially viewed with suspicion but now recognized as fair and forward-thinking, had brought financial stability without compromising the ranch's integrity. Whispering Pines remained Samuel's, the land and buildings still under his name. But the new venture, Hayes Horsemanship, operated as a separate entity, with Brandon handling the business side while Samuel and Madison focused on the training and teaching. The arrangement provided the financial security Samuel needed while preserving the ranch's legacy for future generations. "Any word from the publisher?" Ellie asked Brandon. He nodded, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. "3 offers so far. They all want the manuscript by spring." The book had been Brandon's idea, a comprehensive guide to Samuel's methods, co-written with Madison, who had revealed a surprising talent for translating Samuel's intuitive approach into accessible language. The Horse Whisperer's Legacy, they were calling it, though Samuel still winced at the overly dramatic title. "Don't get ahead of yourselves," Samuel cautioned. "Still got a lot of writing to do before anyone publishes anything." "Always the pessimist," Brandon teased, though without the edge that would have characterized such a remark months earlier. "The hard part's done. You've spent 50 years developing these methods. Now it's just a matter of getting them on paper." As they walked toward the barn where Madison was brushing Phantom down, Samuel reflected on how thoroughly his expectations had been upended. When Brandon Miller had first arrived at Whispering Pines, Samuel had seen him as the embodiment of everything wrong with modern approaches to horsemanship. Impatient, focused on results rather than process, valuing achievement over relationship. Now, Brandon had become an unlikely ally in preserving the very traditions he had once dismissed. He still thought like a businessman, still valued efficiency and results, but he had developed a respect for Samuel's patient methods that went beyond mere acknowledgement of their effectiveness. "There's my girl," Brandon called as they entered the barn. Madison looked up from Phantom's gleaming coat, her smile brightening at the sight of her father. "Hey, Dad, did you tell them about the offers?" "Just did. Samuel's playing it cool, as usual." Madison laughed, returning to her grooming with practiced hands. He wouldn't be Samuel if he got excited about anything less than a perfect flying lead change. The easy banter between them, father, daughter, mentor, filled the barn with a warmth that had nothing to do with the autumn sun outside. Phantom, sensing the relaxed atmosphere, dozed with one hind leg cocked, the picture of equine contentment. Later that evening, after Brandon had returned to his hotel in town and Madison had gone home to prepare for the next day's workshop, Samuel sat alone on his porch, nursing a small whiskey, and watching darkness settle over his land. Ellie had left hours ago, promising to return early to help with final preparations. In the quiet of the evening, Samuel allowed himself to fully appreciate how close he had come to losing everything, not just the ranch and his livelihood, but his life's purpose. The foreclosure notice that had once seemed like an ending had instead become the catalyst for an unexpected new chapter. Whispering Pines was secure now, its future extending beyond Samuel's lifetime. Madison would carry forward his methods, blending them with her own insights and eventual veterinary training. The workshops would bring his approach to a wider audience than he had ever reached working alone. And the book, if it actually materialized, might extend his influence to people and horses he would never meet in person. It wasn't the legacy Samuel had imagined for himself, but as he'd learned through decades of working with troubled horses, the most meaningful journeys rarely followed predictable paths. The sound of hoofbeats drew his attention to the paddock, where a dark shape moved against the twilight sky. Phantom had let himself out of his stall again, a trick he'd somehow mastered despite Samuel's best efforts to secure the latch. The horse wasn't trying to escape. He simply preferred to spend quiet evenings grazing in the paddock rather than confined to his stall. Samuel smiled, not bothering to retrieve him. Some rules were meant to be broken, especially by creatures intelligent enough to know the difference between freedom and chaos. "Enjoy your evening, boy," he called softly. "You've earned it." As if in response, Phantom lifted his head, ears pricked toward the porch where Samuel sat. For a moment, horse and man regarded each other across the darkening yard, two beings who had found in each other exactly what they needed at exactly the right time. Then Phantom returned to his grazing, and Samuel to his whiskey, each content in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but the foundation beneath them, built on patience, understanding, and mutual respect, would remain solid and true. The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for Whispering Pine's first official workshop. Samuel woke before sunrise, his usual routine unaltered by the momentous nature of the day ahead. He fed the horses, checked fences, and was in the kitchen brewing coffee when Ellie's truck pulled up. "Ready for your debut as a teacher?" she asked, accepting the mug he offered. Samuel shrugged, though the slight tremor in his hands betrayed his nerves. "Just going to show them what I've always done. Nothing fancy about it." "That's exactly why they're coming," Ellie reminded him. "For the real thing, not some polished performance." Madison arrived soon after, followed by Brandon, who had brought fresh pastries from the bakery in town. As they prepared the barn and training areas for the day's activities, Samuel felt a curious sense of coming full circle. 6 months ago, he had been a solitary figure fighting a losing battle against time and change. Today he stood at the center of a community, small but growing, dedicated to preserving and extending the quiet wisdom he had spent his life cultivating. At precisely 9 o'clock, the first vehicles began arriving. Horse trailers and pickup trucks carrying people who had traveled from across the state and beyond to learn what Samuel Hayes had to teach. As he watched them approach, Samuel felt the last of his doubts slip away, replaced by the calm certainty that had guided his work with horses for half a century. "Here we go," Madison said, standing beside him at the entrance to Whispering Pines Ranch. "Ready to change some lives?" Samuel smiled, thinking of all the troubled horses he had helped over the decades, and now the people who would carry those methods forward. "One day at a time," he replied, "just like always." Together, they walked out to greet their guests, while behind them in the paddock, Phantom lifted his head and watched with alert interest, a living testament to the power of patience, understanding, and the timeless bond between horses and the humans who truly listen to them.